Okay, we're going to focus on the controlling speed of an animation, and in this first part we're going to focus on easing in and easing out. So that's varying the speed of animated objects. So in this example here we've animated these symbols and we've applied various eases in and out to the different symbols to vary the speeds at different points as they move across the stage. Okay, so if you can start as we normally do by giving your project a name, we will call it speed control. If we put After Effects in there as well, so After Effects speed control. And if you can save that into your intro to After Effects folder. Okay, and as we have done previously, we're going to import the assets which you will have downloaded from Teams. So if you right click, import, file, just make sure, as we've done previously, that you tick create composition. If you select the stones and the stones 2 assets, and make sure under import as you set to composition retain layers. Okay, and that will bring them in, create the compositions and bring the assets in separate folders as we've done previously. Okay, and then if you double click on the stones composition, and you'll see that the layers will appear. If we lock the background, and then these symbols to the right here we're not going to use in this first bit, so if you just select those and delete those for the time being. And now if you select all these layers other than the background, press P for position, and then if you click on the timer underneath the first layer next to position, it will set a keyframe for all the layers because they're all selected. If for any reason they're not all selected, if you remember, you can just press Ctrl A to make sure they are, and then it will apply that position keyframe to all layers. Okay, so make sure you clicked on the timer. That applies a keyframe at 0. Okay, now if you move the playhead to 1 frame, okay, begin to drag the symbols, and if you remember, if you then hold down Shift, it will constrain the drag to a straight line. If you drag them over to the right of the stage, okay, and then we've effectively, very simply, created an animation that moves the position from one side of the stage to another. Okay, we just want to limit the focus work area, so if you move the playhead to 2 frames, and then if you remember, if you press N, that brings this work area slider here to just after 2 frames, and then if we bring the playhead back to the start, press spacebar, and you'll see that just plays on a loop through those 2 frames there, and we can just test out our animation. Okay, so if I just select one of the layers here, I'll select the bottom one, you can see we've got a motion path which we're familiar with, and then each of these dots, and the spaces between the dots importantly, represents the timing. So that is the speed between each frame. Okay, and at the moment you can see it's uniform. We have our keyframes at either end here, so if I just move this in a bit. So first keyframe here, and you'll see that the corresponding keyframe selects on the timeline. Second keyframe here, again corresponding keyframe selects, and then these are all the frames in between. Can also, if you remember, using page up and page down, so if we press page down we can move forward 1 frame at a time, so you see it's jumping from one dot to the next, and then page up, obviously we can go in reverse in the opposite direction 1 frame to the next. Okay, I'm just going to reduce the opacity so you can clearly see what's going on there. So again, if we click on the frame, press Shift T for transparency. So we've got transparency and position still showing, and then we can click on the opacity setting. We're not going to create a keyframe, just reduce that down to 20, and that will just change the setting for the, not for a keyframe, but just for the symbol permanently, and then we can perhaps see a bit more clearly what's going on the motion path here. Okay, so it's important to remember that space between the frames represents the speed, and the important thing is the smaller the space between the frames, then the slower the object's going to be moving. The bigger the space, the faster the object's going to be moving. Okay, so this means this equal spacing means that the speed is constant at the moment. Now if we want to ease the speed, well, I'm going to show you initially. So if we go to this frost layer again, go to the first keyframe and right click on it, go to keyframe assistant, okay, and if we go to ease out, okay, you will see immediately that what happens is the space between the keyframes reduces. And if you remember what we said, that means that the speed slows down. So when we say ease out, what we're saying is ease out of this keyframe. So that means move more slowly out of this keyframe. Okay, so it moves more slowly out of this keyframe and then speeds up and then returns to its a constant speed. Okay, gradually until it gets to the next keyframe. So if we just test that, you can see that is easing out from that first keyframe there. Okay, so that's ease out. So if we move to the next layer above that, the water layer, and if we select this time the second keyframe, and again right click and keyframe assistant, and this time if we select ease in, okay, and you will see the opposite is happening. So what ease in is saying is as you approach the keyframe, slow down, ease in to that particular keyframe. So again, if we test that, you'll see starts off faster and then eases in, slows down to the second keyframe. Okay. Again, you can use page up, page down. If you just hold, press and hold page up or down continuously, you'll see, sorry, let me just bring the playhead back in. Okay, so just to illustrate that a bit more, if we just step through, so if we use page down to move forward through the animation, okay, you'll see that when we start off, the second one we applied, which is easing into the second keyframe, is much faster, further ahead of all of them, and particularly further ahead of the one that we eased out, where we were easing out of the keyframe. So this starts off more slowly. Okay, and then you'll see as we get close to the second keyframe, okay, this one starts to catch up, and this one is slowing down, and then finally when they reach the final keyframe, they're all at the same point. Okay, so I think the important thing to remember there is they're all covering the same distance in the same time, same amount of time, which is 30 frames. But you know, the speed is varying while they cover that distance. Okay, and then finally we'll look at the easy ease setting, which basically applies an ease in and an ease out to each keyframe that you select. Okay, so we'll go up to the next layer, which is the earth layer. We'll select both keyframes on this layer, so shift click, then right click and keyframe assistant again, easy ease, and you'll see that automatically sets that to both keyframes. Now obviously with this first keyframe there is no ease into it because we've got no animation before it, but it slows the easing out, and then it applies an ease in as well to the second keyframe. Okay, we have no other keyframe after this keyframe, so again there is no ease out from this keyframe, but if we did have another keyframe here, you'd have an ease in and an ease out from this keyframe. Okay, so important thing to remember, easy ease applies an ease in and an ease out to any keyframe that you select. You'll see that they are all moving at different speeds, but they're all ending up in the same place. If we just step through that using page up and page down, you'll see that they're moving off here. The one that's easing out here is moving more slowly. The one that is easing out and easing in is slightly more slowly and then moving ahead, and then the one that is easing in is ahead, and then the others catch up with it at the end. So you can see they're moving across the same distance over the same time, so the same overall speed, but the speed is varying as they make that journey. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to move on to looking at the speed graph, which gives us the ability to finally control the speed of an object, acceleration, deceleration, etc., using a graph interface here, a graph editor. Okay, so just put an example up here for you. Okay, so this is an example of a fairly slow acceleration, then more rapid acceleration to a high top speed here, and then a rapid deceleration. Okay, so we just want to reset the motion that we've applied to, or the speed changes that we've applied to these keyframes in the previous version, previous video, when we were using ease in and ease out. So first of all, I'm going to turn off the graph editor, and we can see the keyframes here with the various eases applied to them. If we click and drag a selection over all of those keyframes, and then if you control click on one of the keyframes, you'll see that it changes them all to a circular shape. If you can control click again, it turns them back to that familiar diamond shape. So we're kind of resetting them back to where they were. Okay, I'm just going to adjust the position of this one, just so they're all uniform. Okay, I'm just going to select all the layers here, and we're just going to shift the start point of our animation over to 10 frames here, and then I just want to show you the graph editor itself. So we turn it on and off here, so you see at the top of the layer panel. So if we turn that on, now you can see at the moment, if I do that, there's nothing visible on the graph at all, no graph on there. So that's because I've not selected a property of one of these layers. So if I just click on, if we start with the bottom layer here, the frost layer, and I click on the position property, you'll see here, we see a graph that represents the position. Okay, and you'll see that that starts at 10 frames here, because we shifted the layers along a bit, so that the animation doesn't start to 10 frames. And because the speed is constant, okay, it doesn't change, accelerate or decelerate. It's just a straight horizontal line until we get to the final keyframe here, and then it stops. So just decelerates immediately to 0 because it stops. Okay, and then if we just look down at these settings underneath the timeline now with the graph editor selected, if we click on the eye icon here, we need to make sure that show selected properties is selected. If I turn that off, again, we don't see anything. And also here, we want to make sure that auto select graph type is on, so it shows us the properties for whichever property we have selected. If I change that, you'll see that it shows properties for a different the graph for a different property, should I say. So keep it to auto select properties or graph type, and that's shown as the properties for position. And then finally, if you just make sure that this auto zoom feature is turned on, because when we manipulate the graph, if it gets higher than this, then the timeline will automatically zoom out to fit that, changed graph into the view. Okay, and then we're going to start by selecting one of the keyframes. So these are the two keyframes here. So this is the first keyframe. So the easiest way to select these is to click and drag around them. So if I click and drag around the first keyframe, and if I go over to ease in and click on ease in here, sorry, notice my intentional mistake there. We can't have an ease in because this is the first keyframe. We can't ease into it because nothing's happening before it. So it's ease out. So if we go down to the icons here, this is the ease out icon. If I click on that, okay, you will see that transforms the graph. And if you remember, ease out is a gradual acceleration to a top speed, and then a rapid deceleration to the final frame here. Okay, you can also see if we mouse over the graph here, so if we mouse over the first anchor point, we start off at, so it's measured in pixels per second, this, a very fine measurement. So it starts off at 0 pixels per second at frame 10, and it gives us the layer, frost, its position that's been animated, so it gives us all the information about what's been modified here. If we mouse over the top here, this is the top speed. See, much faster, 2187.43 pixels per second. Okay, and then like I said, it very rapidly from that high speed comes to a stop here at the end. Okay. But actually, interesting, you'll see here from mouse over here, it's still, when it stops, still travelling at quite a rapid speed, 1600 odd pixels per second, so it abruptly stops. It doesn't ease out, slowly stop, it abruptly stops at quite high, fairly high speed. Now if we wanted to correct that and ease it out so it stops more gradually, what we can do is select this second key point, and if we select ease in, okay, you'll see that we've got an ease out here, top speed, and then an ease into the second keyframe. So ease in means to slow down, okay, rather than abruptly stop. Now again, if I want to further manipulate this graph, I can select this first keyframe. If I drag this first keyframe up, you see I'm increasing the initial speed. Okay, and you'll see it zooms in, shows the whole graph. So we've got a very high initial speed represented by large gaps between the frames here, going to smaller gaps between the frames here as it slows down and gradually slows down towards the end. So we've essentially, another term to bring in is we've got a kind of, rather than an ease out now, we've got a speed out. Okay, so we've got a speed out to an ease in. Okay. And then if we do the same with the second keyframe here and drag that up to this point, we've got a kind of inverted kind of bell curve here. So rather than an ease in and an ease out and an ease in, should I say, we now have a speed out and a speed in. So we have the opposite, don't we? And then if you look at this midpoint here, rather than this being the top speed now, this is actually where the object almost comes to a standstill. It goes down to a very low speed and speeds up again. So if we just play that through, you see almost to a stop and then speeds up again. Okay, we might decide we want to take this back to where it was. And if you remember, initially it was a linear graph. So if we select the two keyframes here, and if we go down to this icon here, which is convert selected keyframes to linear, back to linear, click on that and we go back to the initial graph we had, which was this constant speed, wasn't it? So starting at a fairly high speed, constantly and abruptly stopping at the same speed. Okay, now if we select ease in, ease out again, or ease out, ease in, should I say, need to get that clear. So ease out, ease in. And then what we can do is we can manipulate this using the handles as well. You can manipulate the graph using the handles. So if I grab this second handle here and just pull this inward, what this does is it manipulates the shape of the graph. So now this takes us to a very rapid acceleration early on, to a high speed, and then a more gradual deceleration. Okay, and again, just seeing how that's visually represented on the motion path there. You can see the changes between these spaces here are quite large at the beginning, which indicates a very, and the difference between the spaces is quite large, and the spaces themselves are quite large, which indicates an acceleration, rapid acceleration to a high speed. And then as we gradually decelerate here, you see the spaces get much smaller, and the difference between the spaces gets smaller as well, which indicates a gradual deceleration. So now again, if you're manipulating the graph and you find that you're not happy with the results, you can always go back to the initial state. So you can either go back to the linear graph that we started with, or the easy ease graph here. So these are the two kind of default initial settings really, and then you can start manipulating from there again if it starts to go wrong. So I think the question now really is using these separate layers to manipulate the graph. So you've got different types of graph on each layer, and you're really getting a sense of what these graphs are visually representing in terms of the speed of the object, and particularly the acceleration and the deceleration. So again, if I just manipulate this one back, so like we said, rapid acceleration and then a more gradual deceleration here. So you can test it as well. So if I play that through, rapid acceleration, more gradual deceleration, so you can play it through and visually actually see that playing out as well. Then if we do something different with the water layer, now remember that you don't just select the layer here, you actually select the property to see the graph, not the layer, the master layer, it's the property. And again, we can select the 2 keyframes here. We can go to an easy ease initially if we want, and then we can maybe manipulate this in a slightly different way. So if we change this handle this time, so again this is the opposite the previous layer, we've got a gradual acceleration, top speed, and then a rapid deceleration. So it's the kind of inverse of the previous one. Then we could try something different with the next one. Remember to select the property. So what we could do here maybe is we can again initially change that to easy ease. We can manipulate the graph. We could have a rapid, oops, hang on, let me do that again. Manipulate this handle, so rapid initial acceleration, but maybe we could change the start point, so the initial speed of the object is quite high. Okay, increasing and then rapidly decreasing to a very, very slow, gradual finish. Okay, so, and again we can see how that plays out. Okay, so we might want to go to another layer. Again, we can select the keyframes, we can ease it, and then maybe if we manipulate both handles equally, we have something different again. So we've got a gradual, reasonably gradual initial acceleration, then a rapid acceleration to a high speed, rapid deceleration, going to a more gradual deceleration, and again you can see how that's represented on the motion path. So again, if we play that one through, you know, we can even use soloing if we want to just see that one on its own. When you solo, just remember to select the position again so you can see the graph as you play it. So there we go, very rapid in the middle and slow. Okay, and then we go to the final layer. Remember clicking on the property. Again, select keyframes, easy ease, and then you might want to increase the initial speed here just by dragging it up, and remember when you let go it will snap the whole thing into view. It will zoom the whole thing, zoom out automatically. So we've got a very high initial speed here, gradually slowing to a stop. So again, if we see how that plays out, we want to unsolo the previous layer so we can see everything again. There we go. Again, we could solo that just to see it more clearly. There we go. So rapid initial through to gradual stop, which is essentially an ease in, isn't it? Okay. So speed out and an ease in. Okay, so that's the speed graph. So I think the key now really is just experimenting yourselves with these graphs, getting used to how you know the graphs influence the movement that's happening here in on the stage area. Okay.